Hi, I'm Bob.
And I'm Kathy, and we're old people driving around.
Today we're taking a day trip from our base in Scottsdale, Arizona down to Tucson. We're going to drive up Mount Lemmon. It's supposed to be one of the most beautiful drives in America. But before that, we're going to stop off at the Pima Air and Space Museum to see a lot of old aircraft. And after that, we're going to try to drive by the aircraft Boneyard where they store all the surplus airplanes. Should be interesting.
Join us, see what we can see.
And don't forget to stay to the end where we'll give you our travel tips and what we learned on this adventure of old people driving around. Ready?
Ready.
Let's go. We're glad you are joining us on this day trip down to the Tucson area. Whether you just want to follow what we are doing, or you're trying to get ideas for your own adventures, we hope to provide information and entertainment on this channel. Maybe we can encourage you to get out and do some things on your own. Our drive will take about 2 hours to get down to the Pima Air and Space Museum. Then we'll make our way over to the base of Mount Lemmon for the 1 hour drive up the winding Mount Lemmon Highway to the top. The first segment down to Tucson is fairly boring, except for the odd ostrich farm and remote towns. We made it down to the Pima Air and Space Museum without any problems. They have a museum store. Maybe we'll get something. There are a lot of aircraft here, and the museum is split between outside and in several hangars. The admissions desk is in the first hangar, so we walked around that building first. Then we headed outside to walk the grounds. We didn't have any strategy to viewing the aircraft, just wanted to see a good sampling and whatever looked interesting. Then we hit some of the other hangars before leaving. The first hangar has a smattering of artifacts and aircraft, from older planes, experimental aircraft, helicopters, a Blue Angels jet, and modern jet fighters. Then we ventured outside and walked down what I would call Jet Fighter Alley. Then I saw a Stratofortress long-range bombers, so we walked over to see it. It immediately reminded me of the movie Strategic Air Command with Jimmy Stewart. There were several versions of these bombers, some with that extra landing gear at the end of the wings, since they are very wide and may scrape the ground when not airborne. They have some of the more odd-looking aircraft, like this Super Guppy transport plane. It was interesting to see some of the older presidential and VIP aircraft, including this prop plane. Some more fighters from both the US and other countries. I wonder if we had missed a B-17, which was used in World War II. But then we saw this special building dedicated to the B-17 Flying Fortress and the 390th Bomb Group stationed in England during World War II.
Let me tell you a quick story about the museum. We're completely independent from the Pima County Air Museum. We consider ourselves a museum within a museum, and we push on donations. That said, if you like the one, fine. If you don't like the one, that's fine too. This group was stationed in England from 1943 to 1945 and some bombing missions into Europe. One of the typical missions would be they would take off from Farnham Field, that's where they were, loaded, and they would fly to Germany, drop bombs, fly to Russia, land in Russia, refuel, put more bombs on, and bomb on the way back to England.
My sister-in-law's father was a belly ball turret gunner in a B-17 stationed in England. I didn't know to which group he was assigned, but I had the museum docent try to look him up in several of the listings of crew members in the 8th Army Air Force under General Doolittle, but they didn't have him listed. Maybe we can send the museum his information so he can be added. This museum is really a museum within a museum, as they are not officially connected with the Pima Museum. It has a lot of artifacts, dioramas, and information so you can get an idea of what life was like as a bomber crew member. For me, the star of this exhibit was the B-17 bomber. We walked through a couple of other hangars and saw more bombers. This one is the B-29, which flew out of Guam. And here is one of those belly gun turrets. You had to be small and flexible to fit into this little bubble. Can you imagine being folded in there while the enemy was firing at you? Must have been unnerving. Lots of other aircraft, including this Lockheed Blackbird. On our way to Mount Lemmon, we drove past the aircraft Boneyard. There was no access to see the planes, and most of our view was obscured by high embankments. So I'll show you an aerial view so you can see the scope of this place. We just turned onto Catalina Highway, approaching Mount Lemmon. There is a great application available for your mobile device that describes the sights and signs as you drive up the mountain. The audio tour application is called the Mount Lemmon Science Tour. Search for it wherever you get your mobile applications. Mount Lemmon in the Santa Catalina mountain range is one of the mountains that surround the Tucson Basin. Mount Lemmon, with 2 M's, was named after the first woman, Sarah Lemmon, believed to have scaled it back in the 1880s. Before that, it was called Bobdad Doag by the Tuhoa O'Dom tribe, meaning Frog Mountain, because from a certain angle, it looked like a crouching frog. These mountains formed by plate extension, plate cracking, or faults of the North American plate. Layers pushing up to form the mountains and basins is what is called detachment faulting.
You will find several types of rocks on this trip: sedimentary, igneous, and metamorphic rocks. Given the range of climates, there's a large diversity of wildlife. In fact, there are 4 types of wild cats that live in these mountains: mountain lions, bobcats, jaguars, and ocelot. But we didn't see any of these on our drive. We start out here in the desert climate. Here the landscape is full of cactus and shrubs and small trees. Most dramatic are the saguaro cactus, tall plants that look like people with their arms straightened out, which can be seen all around the American West. Saguaros can live beyond 200 years and can grow up to 40 to 60 feet. They look hostile, but they actually provide food and housing for many creatures in the desert. Here, at about 3,500 feet, we see the cactus have become more sparse as they can't survive much above this altitude given the cold winters. As we enter the grassland with a little more water available, we see yucca and agave and native grasses replacing the cactus, but it's still somewhat desert-like in appearance.
There are many pullouts, scenic overlooks, trails, and picnic areas along this route. As we drive up the 25 miles of the Catalina Highway, we go from 3,000 feet to over 9,000 feet above sea level. We pass through several types of habitats called life zones, from desert through grasslands, woodland, and finally forest. The climate changes in each of these habitats since it is cooler and wetter as we climb.
Here, at around 5,000 feet, we enter the woodland zone, which has small oak trees, juniper, and pine. These trees grow larger in the valley that we drive through, and as we drive higher up the mountain. Above 6,500 feet, we enter the forest zone, which has pine trees.
The audio tour we were using recommended 2 scenic stops, Windy Point Vista and Aspen Vista. We'll point these out as we go. Here are some amazing looking rock formations. They're called hoodoos and are all around this area of the mountain. These stacks of rocks look like they were placed here by giants. They look like stones you would pick up on a lake edge suitable for skipping on the water. They were actually eroded by water over the eon. Some look like they could fall on you at any moment.
and above 8,000 feet, we get fir and aspen trees. And as we climb higher, trees become bigger and the forest is thicker as more water is available.
Nearing the top of Mount Lemmon, rather than turning right to get to the top, we continue straight to enter Summer Haven. Summer Haven is a small community at the top of Mount Lemmon used in the summer to escape the heat and in winter for skiing. Among the cabin-like buildings, there is a community center and a few restaurants, but we wanted to stop at this cookie shop. Good cookie. Good cookie. After recharging with sweets, we drove back to take the turnoff onto Ski Run Road. Boy, it's about 30 degrees cooler up here than down in Tucson. As we approach the top of Mount Lemmon, we can see the fire damage caused by the aspen fire of 2003. For years, low-intensity fires stayed mostly to the ground, but given the efforts to stop forest fires, when they did occur, they would grow to high-intensity fires given the large amount of fuel on the ground, and rise high to kill the trees. Even though this fire was years ago, you can still smell the charred wood. Amazing. We've hit the end of the road. Well, as far as we're allowed to drive. Further on is the observatory. There is a nice recreation area up here for hiking, picnicking, or just relaxing and enjoying the view. What a beautiful drive and scenic area. Well, we're on our way back to Scottsdale, almost back to our living quarters here in Scottsdale. And I think that was a really good trip, a fun trip. Did you enjoy it?
I really did. I had a great time.
So now it's time for our travel tips and our lessons learned. My tip is that if you've got activities planned in the Tucson Basin, do those early in the morning and then plan to go up the mountain in the afternoon when it starts to get really hot, because as you're going up, it's going to get cooler. And in fact, it was slightly more than 30 degrees cooler at the top of the mountain. And I think that's a good way of doing it. What's your tip?
Well, my tip is for the driver. To make sure that when you're pulling over to look at one of the beautiful vistas, that you're using one of the designated pullover spots, and that you're not just pulling over on the side of the road where there is a sheer drop-off, such that if we all lean the wrong way in the car, it could become
I was
dangerous.
nowhere near close to the edge of the mountain. Plus, I was getting off on this side, so you would have gone tumbling down.
Oh, good. Well,
but
that's
sometimes you have to stop where you see what you want to take a picture of.
And safely.
Point taken. And what's your lesson learned for this adventure?
Well, my lesson learned was that with many mountains that I have been on before, the vegetation towards the bottom of the mountain is very thick. And as you go up in altitude, things become thinner and less dense. In this mountain range, things are very sparse on the bottom, and as you go towards the top of the mountain, actually at the top of the mountain, there's very thick forest. And the reason for that is because there is much more water available to those plants on the top, which is really cool.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Yeah, there was a nice dense forest at the top. So my lesson learned is about saguaros, the saguaro cactus. And I've known about them before. I've seen them. But what I didn't know is that they live a long time. And in fact, they don't get their first limbs until about 50 years old, which is amazing. Some of these you see with multiple limbs are well over 100 years old. And that's just amazing to think that they've been around that long and still growing. And now for our power tip of this adventure, and that is when you're going up the mountain, although they give you a lot of advice about where to stop and all the vistas, my suggestion is you drive through all the way to the top without stopping. Take note of where you may want to stop on the way down. This way you get an overview of the hour drive and you get to see what all the stops are, so you can plan ahead for the way down and then make the stops, and only the stops that you think are worthwhile. So that's something to do. We did stop a little on the way up, but not for too long. We did most of our stopping on the way down, although the way you're watching it, I did splice in some of those scenes. That's our adventure. Hope you've enjoyed it. And if so, give it a thumbs up and make any comments you want. Please subscribe to this channel so we can continue to bring you some more great adventures of old people driving around. Bye.
Bye.
Ready?
For what?
Ready? You say ready. Ready?
Okay. Ready?
No, I say ready. I say ready and then you respond, ready.
Oh, okay.
Ready?
Ready.
Let's go.